My name is Silas, 32 years old, raised in a mansion in Greenwich where wealth flowed like water. Despite the privilege, I always felt like the family outsider. Nothing prepared me for that Tuesday afternoon, when I returned early from a business trip to find my parents transferring my $10 million inheritance, my grandfather Harold's final gift to my sister Amanda. When I protested, my father dragged me out by my hair while my mother screamed to hand over my bag. Before you hear how I turned the tables, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to see how I made them regret their betrayal. Growing up in our 8-bedroom Georgian mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, meant living a life most people only see in movies. The manicured lawns, indoor swimming pool, and summer homes created a picture-perfect facade that hid the cold reality of my family dynamic. My father, Richard, was a third-generation investment banker with Hastings Financial, a firm his grandfather had established during the economic boom of the 1920s. My mother, Eleanor, came from old money. Her family name opened doors and commanded respect in social circles where lineage mattered more than character. Then there was my sister Amanda, 3 years my junior, who somehow emerged from the womb, already fitting perfectly into our parents' expectations. She had our father's head for numbers and our mother's social grace. While I struggled through business classes in high school, Amanda effortlessly maintained a 4.0 GPA and ran the investment club. My parents' pride in her was palpable. Their faces would literally light up when she entered a room. For me, they reserved tight smiles and constant critiques about my posture, my grades, my choice of friends. Only my grandfather Harold saw me differently. Dad's father had built the family fortune himself, starting with a small loan and transforming it into a real estate and investment empire through sheer determination and innovative thinking. Unlike my father, who inherited his position, Grandfather Harold knew the value of hard work and independent thinking. He was the only one who didn't frown when I expressed interest in architecture instead of finance. "The world doesn't need another investment banker," he told me on my 16th birthday as we sat in his study, surrounded by architectural models he'd collected. "The world needs people who create, who build things that last beyond quarterly reports." Those quiet moments with Grandfather became my sanctuary. Every Sunday afternoon, while my parents took Amanda to various social events deemed important for her future networking, Harold would invite me to his home office. We'd spend hours discussing everything from classical architectural principles to modern sustainable design approaches. He showed me portfolios of buildings he'd commissioned, explaining how good architecture married form and function. "Your father doesn't understand because he's never built anything with his hands," Harold confided once. "He moves money around, which is necessary, but not the same as creating something people will use and appreciate for generations." Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents grew increasingly strained. When I chose to apply to architecture programs instead of business schools, my father barely spoke to me for weeks. The night I received my acceptance to Cornell's architecture program with a partial merit scholarship should have been celebratory. Instead, my father looked at the letter and said, "Well, I suppose some developer will need someone to draw up his bathroom plans." My mother was more subtle but equally dismissive. "Darling, architects don't usually move in our circles unless they're designing our homes," she said while adjusting her pearls. "Are you sure you wouldn't prefer something more appropriate for someone with your background?" Only Amanda seemed genuinely interested in my passion. Though in retrospect, I realize her questions about my studies were more about gathering information to report back to our parents. She'd ask about my projects, then casually mention my struggling grades at family dinners, though I maintained a 3.8 GPA throughout college. Throughout those formative years, I tried desperately to earn my parents' approval while remaining true to my passion. I'd bring home design awards only to have them displayed in the back hallway rather than the main living space where Amanda's business competition trophies stood prominently. I'd share exciting projects I was working on only to have conversations redirected to Amanda's internship at a prestigious financial firm. Grandfather Harold remained my steadfast supporter. When I graduated with honors, he was front row center, beaming with pride, while my parents sat stiffly beside him, applauding politely but without enthusiasm. After the ceremony, he pulled me aside and pressed a small box into my hand. "Your graduation gift," he said as I opened it to find his prized pocket watch, a Patek Philippe that had been with him since his first major business success. "Time is the one thing we can't make more of, Silas. Use yours to build the life you want, not the one others expect." What I didn't know then was that Harold had begun making changes to his will. While he never explicitly told me he would occasionally make comments about making things right and ensuring my future, I didn't realize the significance of these statements until much later. Our last conversation happened just 3 days before his sudden heart attack. We were reviewing my portfolio as I prepared for job interviews. "You have a vision that this family has lacked for a generation," he said, his voice more serious than usual. "Promise me, you'll never lose that, no matter what happens." I promised, not knowing that would be the last advice he would ever give me. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. I was in my small apartment working on a design proposal for a boutique eco-hotel when my phone lit up with my mother's name. "Your grandfather has had a heart attack," she said, her voice eerily calm. "The ambulance is taking him to Greenwich Hospital. Your father and Amanda are already on their way." I dropped everything and drove through the pouring rain, my hands shaking on the steering wheel as I prayed to arrive in time. The hospital's fluorescent lights cast ghastly shadows across the waiting room where my father stood talking quietly with a doctor. Amanda sat nearby, her face buried in her hands in what appeared to be grief. "You're too late," my father said flatly as I approached. "He passed 5 minutes ago." The words hit like a physical blow. I hadn't even had the chance to say goodbye. While my father arranged for the body to be transferred to our family's preferred funeral home, and my mother made calls to family members, I stood alone by the window watching rain streak down the glass, and feeling as though part of my life en redide, a foundation had crumbled. The funeral was held 3 days later at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, where generations of my father's family had marked births, marriages, and deaths. Nearly 300 people attended, business associates, friends, extended family members, and even some politicians Harold had supported over the years. As his only grandson and known favorite, I was asked to deliver the eulogy. I spoke about Harold's vision, his generosity, his belief in building things that would outlast us all. I shared stories of our Sunday discussions and how he taught me to see beauty in structural integrity. Throughout my speech, I noticed my parents exchange glances, clearly uncomfortable with the obvious bond I was describing. Amanda sat rigidly beside them, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief that never seemed to collect any actual tears. My grandfather built his legacy with his own hands and mind, I concluded. He taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in what you create and who you become. I promised to honor that lesson every day. As I returned to my seat, Harold's oldest friend and business partner, Franklin Miller, squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "He was so proud of you, son. More than you know." A week after the funeral, we gathered at the offices of Webster and Pierce, our family's law firm since my great-grandfather's time. Philip Webster, the senior partner who had handled Harold's affairs for decades, welcomed us into the wood-paneled conference room with somber efficiency. My parents sat with perfect posture, my father occasionally checking his watch, as if he had more important places to be. Amanda positioned herself between them, wearing a black dress that seemed more appropriate for a business meeting than a will reading. I sat across from them, still numb with grief and unsure what to expect. Before I begin the formal reading, Webster said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to note that Harold made substantial changes to his will approximately 6 months ago. He was of sound mind and extremely clear about his intentions." My father frowned. "What changes? He didn't mention anything to me." Webster cleared his throat. "Perhaps it would be best if I simply proceed with the reading." What followed was nothing short of seismic. After some minor bequests to charities and a few loyal employees, Webster arrived at the main provision. "To my grandson, Silas James Hastings, I leave the remainder of my estate, including all financial holdings, real estate properties, and business interests, currently valued at approximately $10 million. The room fell silent. My father's face flushed deep red. My mother's hand flew to her pearls. Amanda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "There must be some mistake," my father finally said. "My father wouldn't have—" "There is no mistake," Webster interrupted, removing an envelope from the file. "Harold also left this letter for Silas, which explains his decision." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and began to read silently. "My dear Silas, If you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever comes next. Don't grieve too long, I've had a good run. I've made this decision after much thought. Your father and sister have the family business and your mother's inheritance. They will be fine. You have a vision and talent that needs nurturing without the constraints of financial worry. This money isn't a gift, it's an investment in what you'll create. Build beautiful, meaningful structures. Make spaces that improve lives. Show the world what the Hastings name can really stand for. I'm proud of the man you've become. With love and faith in your future grandfather Harold. I couldn't stop the tears that slipped down my cheeks as Webster continued with the technical details. My father interrupted repeatedly, asking about trusts, conditions, and restrictions, clearly seeking some loophole. There were none. Harold had made his wishes airtight. "This is outrageous," my mother finally declared. "Amanda has been groomed to help with the family investments. She should at least receive half." Mrs. Hastings Webster said firmly your father-in-law's wishes were explicit. The distribution is as I've read it. The drive home was excruciating. My father gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white occasionally, glancing at me in the rearview mirror with barely concealed rage. My mother stared straight ahead, lips pressed into a thin line. Amanda sniffled dramatically in the seat beside me. The following months became an exercise in psychological warfare. What began as suggestions that I share the inheritance with Amanda quickly evolved into demands. Family dinners became interrogations about my plans for our grandfather's money. He clearly wasn't thinking clearly, my father would say. "Your sister has actual financial training. You'll probably waste it all on some artistic pipe dream." I tried explaining my vision for an architectural firm specializing in sustainable commercial spaces, showing them business plans, potential partnerships, market analyses, but they dismissed every presentation. "At least invest half with your sister's guidance," my mother urged. "That's the reasonable approach." I held firm, honoring Harold's wishes by moving forward with my plans. I began meeting with potential business partners, researching office spaces, and developing my firm's philosophy. The inheritance would be transferred to my control on my 33rd birthday, just 3 months away. In early June, I flew to Seattle to meet with a renowned architectural firm known for innovative, sustainable design. They were interested in a possible East Coast partnership. The meetings went exceptionally well, and I decided to return home a day early to share the good news. That decision would change everything. My flight landed at JFK at 2 in the afternoon hours, ahead of when my family expected me back. I took a cab directly to our Greenwich estate, energized by the positive meetings and eager to start putting concrete plans in motion. As the taxi pulled up to our long driveway, I noticed several unfamiliar cars parked outside a black Mercedes I didn't recognize, and the distinctive vintage Jaguar that belonged to Philip Webster. The driver helped me with my luggage, and I tipped him generously before heading toward the front door. As I approached, I heard raised voices coming from my father's study, the wood-paneled room where family discussions typically took place. I quietly let myself in, planning to freshen up before announcing my early return. The challenge needs to be filed before the funds transfer next month. I heard my father say, his voice carrying through the hallway. "We need to move quickly." Something in his tone made me pause. I set my bags down silently and moved closer to the partially open study door. "Richard, are you absolutely certain we should proceed this way?" Webster's normally confident voice sounded hesitant. Harold's wishes were quite clear. My father wasn't thinking clearly, my father responded sharply. He was manipulated by Silas and his constant attention. We all know Harold was becoming increasingly sentimental in his final years. My blood ran cold. I edged closer to the door, careful to stay out of sight. "The approach we've discussed has merit," Webster continued reluctantly. "Challenging on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity could potentially work, especially with the documentation about Silas's therapy sessions for anxiety during college." My private therapy sessions. How did they even know about those? I had sought help briefly during my sophomore year when the pressure of my father's disappointment had become overwhelming. The sessions had been confidential and paid for out of my own pocket. "Those records will be perfect," Amanda's voice chimed in eagerly. "We can argue that Silas manipulated grandfather, by playing on his sympathy, using his mental health issues to appear vulnerable and in need of financial support. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister was actively plotting to use my past struggles against me. Eleanor has already spoken with Dr. Phillips, my father added. He's willing to provide a statement suggesting Harold showed signs of cognitive decline in his final year. My mother's voice came next. Once we have the inheritance ruling overturned, we'll need to move quickly to transfer the assets to Amanda's control before Silas can respond. I've prepared the necessary paperwork, Webster said. We just need Silas's signature on these release forms, which you believe you can obtain. He'll sign, my father said confidently. Once we present the evidence we've gathered, he'll understand fighting would only result in public embarrassment. No one wants their mental health issues spread across court documents. I'd heard enough. I pushed the door open fully, causing all four of them to freeze in shock. So, this is why you invited our family lawyer over during my business trip, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rage and betrayal coursing through me. To conspire to steal my inheritance using my private medical information. My father recovered quickly, his expression hardening. This isn't theft, Silas. It's correcting a mistake. Harold wasn't thinking clearly when he made you his heir. A mistake, I echoed incredulously. Grandfather spent more time with me than with any of you in his final years. He knew exactly what he was doing. My mother stood smoothing her skirt with practiced composure. Darling, be reasonable. You aren't equipped to handle this kind of money. Amanda has the proper education. Amanda didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. It's for the best, Silas. I'll make sure you receive a monthly allowance for your architectural hobby. Webster at least had the grace to look uncomfortable shuffling the papers in front of him. Perhaps we should discuss this when emotions aren't so high. There's nothing to discuss, I said, looking directly at each of them. The will is clear. Grandfather wanted me to have his estate to build my architectural firm. That was his choice, not yours to override. My father slammed his hand on the desk. You're not taking Harold's money to waste on drawing buildings. This family has a legacy to protect. A legacy of what I shot back. Manipulation, theft. Betrayal of your own son. Don't be dramatic, my mother sighed. Just sign the papers releasing your claim, and we can put this unfortunate situation behind us. Webster slid a document across the desk toward me. This would simplify matters for everyone involved. I picked up the paper, scanned it briefly, then tore it in half. I will not sign away my inheritance. Grandfather made his wishes clear, and I intend to honor them. What happened next still seems surreal. My father's face contorted with a rage I'd never seen before. He lunged around the desk toward me, grabbing my arm with bruising force. You ungrateful little shit, he hissed. After everything we've done for you. I yanked my arm away. Done for me. You've spent my entire life making me feel like a disappointment because I didn't fit your narrow definition of success. That's because you are a disappointment, he shouted. A real Hastings would understand his duty to the family business. Richard Webster cautioned. This isn't helping. Stay out of this, Philip, my father snapped before turning back to me. You have two choices. Sign the papers or get out of my house. Permanently. The ultimatum hung in the air like a physical thing. Despite the shock and pain, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time, I saw my family with complete clarity. I need to get some things from my room, I said quietly. You'll sign first, my father insisted. No, I won't, I replied, turning toward the door. And that's when things turned physical. My father grabbed my shoulder with surprising strength, spinning me around to face him. His eyes burned with a fury I'd never witnessed before. Not even during our worst arguments about my career choice. You don't walk away from me, he growled. Not until this is settled. I removed his hand from my shoulder. There's nothing to settle. The inheritance is legally mine, and no amount of threats will change that. My mother stepped forward, her perfectly manicured hand pointing toward the door. If you won't be reasonable, then, you are no longer welcome in this house. You've always been selfish, Silas. Always thinking about your wants instead of your family's needs. Their words stung, but I refused to show it. I'm going to my room to pack some essentials. Then I'll leave voluntarily. As I turned again to exit the study, Amanda moved to block the doorway. You're not going anywhere except out the front door. Empty-handed. The realization that this wasn't an impulsive reaction but a coordinated plan hit me like ice water. They had discussed this, prepared for this scenario where I refused to sign over my inheritance. Move así de Amanda primero, said quietly. She crossed her arms, a smirk playing at her lips. Make me. Webster finally stood, looking distinctly uncomfortable with how the situation was deteriorating. Perhaps we should all take some time to cool down and discuss this rationally tomorrow. There's nothing to discuss, my father barked. He either signs or he leaves with nothing. I sidestepped Amanda and headed toward the grand staircase that led to the second floor where my bedroom was located. I could hear my father following closely behind his expensive shoes, clicking angrily on the marble flooring. My room, the same one I'd had since childhood, felt like a museum of a life I was rapidly leaving behind. The architectural books lining the shelves, the drafting table in the corner, the framed photo of Grandfather Harold and me at my college graduation. I grabbed my largest duffel bag from the closet and began filling it with essentials, the clothes, my laptop, important documents, and the pocket watch Harold had given me. I had just zipped the bag closed when my mother appeared in the doorway, face flushed with anger. You're not taking anything from here, she declared, her voice rising to a shrill pitch I'd rarely heard before. Everything in this house belongs to this family. A family you're choosing to leave. These are my personal belongings, I replied evenly, slinging the bag over my shoulder. Hand over that bag, she shrieked, lunging forward to grab at the strap. You don't deserve anything from this house. I held firm to my bag, refusing to relinquish it. Mom, stop this. You're being irrational. Her perfectly composed facade cracked completely. Irrational. You're stealing $10 million from your sister. From your family. I'm not stealing anything. It was given to me by grandfather. My father appeared behind her, his face a mask of cold fury. Your grandfather was a sentimental old fool who didn't understand what you really are. A parasite who manipulated him for money. Something inside me snapped at hearing Harold's memory disrespected. Don't you dare speak about him that way. He saw right through you. Your greed. Your superficiality. Your obsession with appearances over substance. The blow came without warning, my father's open palm connecting with my cheek with enough force to snap my head to the side. The shock of it froze me in place momentarily. In 32 years, he had never struck me. Richard Webster called from the hallway, having followed the commotion upstairs. This isn't the way to handle this. My father ignored him, grabbing a fistful of my hair and yanking hard. Get out of my house, he growled, dragging me toward the door while I struggled to maintain my balance. The pain was intense, but the humiliation was worse. I clutched my bag with one hand and tried to break his grip with the other as he dragged me down the hallway toward the stairs. My mother followed, continuing to demand I leave the bag behind. Amanda watched from the landing, making no move to intervene but unable to hide the satisfaction in her expression. Let go of me, I demanded, finally breaking free at the top of the stairs. My scalp burned where hair had been pulled out. My father moved to grab me again, but Webster stepped between us. Richard, stop this immediately. You're crossing a line that can't be uncrossed. Get out of my way, Philip, my father seethed. This is family business. It's assault, Webster countered, and I won't be a witness to it. My father hesitated, some of his legal training evidently breaking through his rage. He stepped back, straightening his tie in a gesture so familiar it was almost comical in the circumstances. Fine, he said coldly. Walk out on your own, but nothing in that bag belongs to you. Everything in this bag is mine. I insisted, moving cautiously toward the stairs, purchased with my money, or gifted to me personally. My mother made another grab for the bag as I passed. Not that watch. It's a family heirloom. Given to me by its owner, I replied, protecting the pocket watch that was safely tucked inside an interior pocket. As I descended the stairs, the family portrait hanging in the foyer caught my eye, The four of us arranged in formal attire, smiling as if we were the perfect family. The lie of that image struck me profoundly in that moment. I reached the front door before my father rushed past me, planting himself firmly to block my exit. "The papers, Silas. Sign them, or you'll regret it." Looking into his eyes, the same hazel shade as mine, I saw nothing but a stranger. "I already regret trusting you to be the father I deserved." With surprising speed for a man in his 60s, he grabbed me by the collar and physically dragged me the remaining few feet to the door. Webster called out in protest, but did nothing to physically intervene. My father threw the door open and shoved me roughly onto the front steps, my duffel bag following as he tossed it after me. "You're dead to us," he spat. "Don't come crawling back when you fail." Neighbors across the street had stopped to stare at the commotion. The Hastings family, always so concerned with appearances, was having its dirty laundry aired for all to see. As I picked myself up, dignity in tatters but resolve intact, I looked my father in the eye one last time. "You will regret this," I said quietly, my voice steady despite everything. "Not because of what I'll do to you, but because of what you've done to yourselves. Grandfather would be ashamed." I turned and walked away, feeling my mother and sister watching from the doorway, Webster standing uncomfortably behind them. My cheek throbbed from my father's slap. My scalp stung where he'd pulled my hair, but the deepest pain was internal. The final death of the illusion that I had ever truly been part of this family. Once I was out of sight of the house, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and called the only friend I trusted completely. "Marcus," I said when he answered, "I need a place to stay. My family just threw me out." His response was immediate. "I'll text you my address. Stay as long as you need." As I waited for a rideshare to take me to Marcus's apartment in Stamford, I sat on a public bench, still shaking from the confrontation. The physical pain was subsiding, but the emotional wound was raw and gaping. For the first time since Harold's death, I allowed myself to truly break down, sobbing quietly with my head in my hands. When I finally collected myself enough to look up, an older man walking his dog was watching me with concern. "Are you all right, son?" he asked kindly. I wiped my face, embarrassed. "No," I answered honestly. "But I will be." In that moment, as strange as it sounds, I believed it. Something had broken inside me today, but something else, something stronger, was taking its place. Marcus's apartment was a far cry from the mansion I'd just been ejected from, a modest one-bedroom in a middle-class neighborhood in Stamford. But when he opened the door, the genuine concern on his face offered more warmth than I'd felt in my family home for years. "Jesus, Silas," he said, taking in my disheveled appearance and the red mark on my cheek. What the hell happened? Over a beer at his small kitchen table, I recounted everything: the inheritance, the conspiracy I'd overheard, and the violent expulsion from my childhood home. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly outraged. "They physically assaulted you?" he finally asked, incredulous. "Your own father dragged you by your hair?" I nodded, wincing as my fingers grazed my still tender scalp, in front of Webster and the neighbors. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "That's assault. We should call the police." "Not yet," I said. "First, I need to figure out where I stand legally with the inheritance." After finishing our beers, we took inventory of what I'd managed to bring with me. My laptop contained most of my professional portfolio and contacts. I had my wallet with ID and credit cards, though I worried my parents might try to freeze any accounts they had access to. Most importantly, I had grandfather Harold's pocket watch and a flash drive containing recordings of some of our conversations. Harold had begun recording our Sunday discussions in his final year, claiming he wanted to document his life stories for posterity. What I hadn't realized until that moment was how valuable those recordings might now be as evidence of his mental clarity and intentions. "I have some recordings of our conversations," I explained to Marcus, including one where he specifically mentions wanting me to use his money to start my own firm. "That's huge," Marcus said. "What about your savings?" I had a modest account my parents didn't know about, money I'd saved from freelance design work during and after college. It wouldn't last long, but it would buy me time to fight back. "I have enough for a couple months of living expenses," I said. And I need to find a lawyer, someone completely independent of my family's connections. Marcus offered his pull-out couch for as long as I needed it. First thing tomorrow, we'll get you legal help, he promised. Try to get some sleep. You're safe here. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face contorted with rage, felt the sharp pain of his hand in my hair. But somewhere, amid the tumult of emotions, a plan began to form. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work to help me. His girlfriend Layla was a paralegal at a law firm specializing in estate litigation. She agreed to ask around discreetly for recommendations. By noon, I had an appointment with Jessica Bennett, a tough litigator known for taking on wealthy families in inheritance disputes. Her office was modest but professional, her handshake firm as she greeted me. So your family is trying to overturn your grandfather's will using your private medical records and false claims of manipulation, she summarized after I'd explained my situation. And when you refused to sign their documents, your father physically assaulted you and threw you out of the house. That's correct, I confirmed. She leaned forward, eyes sharp. Do you have any evidence of your grandfather's intentions or mental state? I pulled out the flash drive. Recordings of our conversations over the past year, including discussions about the inheritance, and his letter explaining his decision. Bennett's expression brightened as she made notes. What about the assault witnesses? The family lawyer witnessed it, along with neighbors across the street. And I have. I hesitated before lifting my shirt to reveal bruising on my arm, where my father had grabbed me. She documented the injuries with photographs. We need to move quickly. If they're planning to challenge the will, we need to secure an injunction to prevent any transfers while litigation is pending. How much will this cost, I asked, thinking of my limited savings. Normally quite a bit, she admitted. But given the circumstances and the clear evidence of misconduct, I'm willing to work on contingency. I get paid when you do. As we discussed strategy, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Hesitantly, I answered. Silas Hastings, a gruff voice asked. Yes, who's this? Franklin Miller, your grandfather's business partner. We need to talk. Bennett agreed to come with me to meet Franklin at his office downtown. The elderly man embraced me warmly when we arrived, his eyes taking in my bruised face with concern. Harold would be furious if he could see what they've done to you, he said. He feared something like this might happen. Franklin revealed that Harold had shared his concerns about my parents' reaction to the will. He knew they wouldn't accept his decision easily. That's why he took additional precautions. From his safe, Franklin retrieved a sealed envelope. Harold left this with me, as insurance. It's a second will filed with a different law firm reaffirming his intentions and explicitly addressing any claims of manipulation or diminished capacity. Inside was a comprehensive document, including statements from Harold's personal physician confirming his mental competence and letters detailing his reasoning. There was also a USB drive containing video recordings of Harold explaining his decision. He was thorough, Bennett said, clearly impressed. Harold didn't build an empire by being careless, Franklin replied. He also left instructions for me to provide financial support for Silas's legal battle if necessary. As we reviewed the materials, another piece of the puzzle emerged. Harold had documented concerning patterns in how my father had been managing the family business, questionable investments, misrepresentations to clients, and potential tax improprieties. He was gathering evidence, Franklin explained. Not to expose Richard, but to protect the company's legacy. And now, to protect you. By the end of our meeting, we had formulated a multi-pronged strategy. Bennett would file for an emergency injunction to freeze the estate pending resolution. She would also prepare ethics complaints against Webster for his involvement in using confidential medical records. Franklin would provide financial backing and testimony about Harold's mental state and intentions. As for me, I had a role to play as well. While my family expected me to retreat in shame, I would instead begin reaching out to key contacts in the architectural community, people who had respected Harold and who might support my fledgling firm once this was resolved. They expect you to disappear, Bennett said as we wrapped up. Your power lies in doing exactly the opposite. For the first time since being thrown out of my home, I felt a glimmer of hope. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but with allies like Franklin and Bennett, and the foresight of my grandfather, I had a fighting chance. That evening, as Marcus, Layla, and I shared takeout in their small apartment, my phone buzzed with texts from unknown numbers, words of support from neighbors who had witnessed my ejection, offers of help from Harold's former employees who had heard rumors of the dispute. Word was spreading through Greenwich's tight social circles, and not in the way my status-conscious parents would have wanted. "Your grandfather had more friends than enemies," Marcus observed as I showed him the messages. "That counts for something in a town like Greenwich." That night I slept soundly for the first time since Harold's death, the weight of isolation lifting as I realized I wasn't fighting alone. Bennett didn't waste any time. By 8 o'clock the next morning, she had filed an emergency petition to freeze all assets in Harold's estate pending resolution of the dispute. By noon, we received word that a judge had granted the temporary freeze, the first victory in what promised to be a difficult battle. My phone rang shortly after with my father's number. Bennett had advised me not to speak with my family directly, so I let it go to voicemail. His message was exactly what she had predicted, threats mixed with attempts to make me feel guilty. "You're making a spectacle of this family," he hissed in the recording. "Come to your senses and drop this before you destroy everything our name stands for." Webster called next, his tone more measured but message similar. "Silas, this approach benefits no one but the lawyers. Let's discuss a compromise that works for everyone." Bennett listened to both messages, smiling slightly. "They're rattled. Good. Now we press forward." Our next step was filing formal complaints against Webster with the Bar Association for ethical violations, specifically his involvement in attempting to use my confidential medical records. We also submitted the evidence of my father's physical assault, including photographs of my injuries and statements from witnesses. "We're not necessarily pursuing criminal charges yet," Bennett explained. "But documenting the assault establishes a pattern of misconduct that strengthens our case regarding the inheritance." Franklin proved invaluable, connecting us with former employees and associates of Harold's who could testify to his mental acuity and our relationship. Several came forward voluntarily after hearing how I'd been treated. "Harold was like family to me," his former executive assistant told us during a preparation meeting. "He talked about you constantly, Silas, how proud he was of your talent and integrity. There was nothing wrong with his mind when he made that will." As legal proceedings began, I focused on rebuilding my professional foundation. Using my laptop and Marcus's Wi-Fi, I reached out to contacts in the architectural community, explaining my situation honestly, but without bitterness. The response was overwhelmingly supportive, particularly from those who had known and respected Harold. "Your grandfather commissioned my firm's first major project," wrote the head of a prestigious sustainable design company. "I'd be honored to discuss potential collaboration once you're established." Meanwhile, the Greenwich social grapevine was working in our favor. My parents had always been more respected than liked in local circles, their wealth commanding deference, but their coldness preventing genuine connection. As details of their actions spread, subtle but significant shifts occurred. Invitations to exclusive events mysteriously stopped arriving. Business associates began finding excuses to reschedule meetings. Amanda was feeling the impact too. Her fiancé, the son of a prominent banking family, began asking uncomfortable questions after hearing rumors about the inheritance dispute. When she couldn't provide satisfactory answers, he suggested taking a break to reconsider their engagement. 2 weeks into our legal battle, we received our first major breakthrough. Bennett's investigator uncovered evidence that Webster had accessed my medical records without proper authorization, a serious ethical violation that could potentially cost him his license. When confronted with this evidence during a preliminary hearing, Webster visibly paled. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, ordered a 2-hour recess. When court resumed, Webster had new counsel representing him personally, separate from his role as my family's attorney. "Your Honor," his personal attorney stated, "Mr. Webster wishes to recuse himself from representing the Hastings family in this matter due to potential conflicts of interest." It was a significant crack in my family's united front. Without their trusted legal advisor, they would need to find new representation, someone without decades of knowledge about family affairs and Harold's intentions. The judge scheduled a full hearing for the following week to address the central question of Harold's will. Bennett was confident, but cautious. "We have strong evidence, but your parents will fight viciously," she warned. "Be prepared for them to say hurtful things about you in court." She was right. The hearing was brutal. My father's new attorney, a sharp-eyed litigator known for aggressive tactics, painted me as a manipulative failure who had preyed on an elderly man's sympathies. My mother testified tearfully about Harold's declining years and how I had monopolized his time to isolate him from family influence. Amanda's testimony was perhaps the most painful. "My brother has always been jealous of my success," she claimed, her expression a perfect mask of concern. "He couldn't compete with me professionally, so he used emotional manipulation to turn our grandfather against the family business." Throughout their testimony, I maintained a composed demeanor, even as their words cut deep. Bennett had prepared me well. Let them show their true colors to the judge. Your restraint will speak volumes. When our turn came, Bennett methodically dismantled their narrative. First came Franklin, who described Harold's sharp business acumen until the very end, including complex deals negotiated just weeks before his death. Then Harold's physician testified that he had shown no signs of cognitive decline during regular examinations. The most powerful evidence came from Harold himself. The court fell silent as we played a video recording from 3 months before his death, in which he clearly explained his decision. "I'm leaving my personal fortune to my grandson Silas because he embodies the values that built this family's success: creativity, integrity, and vision. My son Richard has the family business and considerable wealth of his own. He and his daughter Amanda share a worldview focused on accumulating rather than creating. Silas will use these resources to build something meaningful. I make this decision with full awareness and conviction." Following the video, Bennett presented the evidence of my parents' conspiracy and subsequent assault. The judge's expression grew increasingly severe as photographs of my injuries were displayed and witness statements read into the record. Just when it seemed we had presented our full case, Bennett revealed one final bombshell. "Your Honor, we've recently gained access to a secured safe in Harold Hastings' private office containing documents he intended to be found only in case of a challenge to his will." The documents included Harold's personal journal in which he had documented his growing concerns about my father's business practices and treatment of me. More damaging still was evidence that my father had misrepresented certain investment returns to Harold in their family business, potentially constituting fraud. "These documents are not directly relevant to the will dispute," Bennett acknowledged, "but they demonstrate Harold Hastings' concerns about his son's judgment and ethics concerns that informed his decision regarding the inheritance." My father's face turned ashen as the journal excerpts were read aloud. My mother's perfect composure finally cracked entirely, her hands shaking as she whispered urgently to their attorney. Amanda simply stared straight ahead, the reality of her situation finally seeming to dawn on her. During a brief recess, their attorney approached Bennett with a settlement offer. They would drop the challenge to the will if we agreed not to pursue further investigation into the business improprieties mentioned in Harold's journal. Bennett brought the offer to me, explaining the pros and cons. "We could end this today," she said. "You get your inheritance clean, and clear they avoid potential regulatory scrutiny." I considered it carefully. The fight had already taken a toll on my health and energy. But something about letting them off the hook completely didn't sit right. "I don't want to destroy the family business," I told her. "Too many innocent people's livelihoods depend on it. But I can't agree to completely bury evidence of wrongdoing either." We countered with our own offer. They would acknowledge Harold's will as valid and issue a formal apology for their actions, including the assault. In exchange, I would not actively pursue investigation into the business issues, though I would not lie if questioned by authorities. After tense negotiations, they accepted with one modification: the apology would be private, not public. I agreed, caring more about resolution than public vindication. When the judge returned, we presented our settlement agreement. She reviewed it carefully before addressing the courtroom. "I find this resolution appropriate given the evidence presented," she stated firmly. "The will of Harold Hastings stands as written." Furthermore, she added, looking directly at my father, this court strongly condemns the actions taken against Silas Hastings, which bordered on criminal. Consider yourselves fortunate that your son has shown more restraint than you deserved. With a bang of her gavel, the legal battle was over. I had won. Outside the courthouse, Franklin embraced me warmly. Harold would be proud, he said, his eyes glistening. Not just of the outcome, but of how you handled yourself throughout. As we walked down the courthouse steps, I glimpsed my family huddled with their attorney across the plaza. For a brief moment, my father's eyes met mine. There was no warmth there. No acknowledgement of wrong, just cold calculation. Of losses and next moves. I turned away first, realizing that while I had won my inheritance, some losses were permanent. And perhaps that was for the best. The legal victory marked the beginning of a new chapter rather than the end of the story. Within weeks, Harold's estate was formally transferred to my control, including not just the $10 million, but also several properties and investment accounts I hadn't known about. The final total exceeded $12 million, a staggering amount that came with both opportunity and responsibility. True to my promise to Harold, I established my architectural firm, deliberately choosing a name that honored him rather than the family brand, Harold's Legacy Design. I leased modest offices in downtown Stamford rather than New York or Greenwich, wanting to build something authentic rather than flashy. My business plan focused on sustainable commercial spaces, office buildings, research facilities, and mixed-use developments designed to minimize environmental impact while maximizing human well-being. It was a niche with growing demand but still underserved by established firms. Franklin proved invaluable again, introducing me to former clients and associates of Harold's who might need architectural services. My first commission came through one such connection, redesigning the headquarters of a tech company Harold had invested in early on. We want something that reflects our values, their CEO explained during our initial meeting. Sustainable, innovative, but not ostentatious. Harold always said you were the right person for this kind of vision. That project led to others, and within 6 months, Harold's Legacy Design had a small but impressive portfolio of projects in development. I hired a team of talented young architects who shared my philosophy, creating a collaborative environment, unlike the rigid hierarchy I'd grown up observing in my father's firm. On a personal level, I chose to build a different kind of life than the one I'd been raised in. Instead of a mansion, I designed and built a modest but beautiful home on a small property outside Stamford. Open concept, with abundant natural light, sustainable materials and spaces, designed for comfort rather than showing off wealth. The most unexpected development came almost 8 months after the court case. On a rainy Tuesday, oddly parallel to the day I'd learned of Harold's death, my assistant informed me that Eleanor Hastings was in our reception area asking to see me. My mother looked older than when I'd last seen her, the perfectly maintained facade showing cracks around the eyes and mouth. She sat stiffly in the chair across from my desk, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. "Your office is nice," she offered awkwardly, glancing around at the open modern space with its sustainable materials and abundant plants. "Thank you," I replied simply. "What brings you here, Mom?" She hesitated, clearly struggling with whatever had prompted this visit. "Things have been difficult since the court case." I waited, not making it easier for her, but not being intentionally cruel either. "Your father's firm is struggling," she finally continued. "Several major clients left after rumors about financial irregularities. The SEC is conducting an informal inquiry. I'm sorry to hear that," I said honestly, "but I don't see how I can help." "Amanda's fiancé broke off their engagement," my mother added, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "She's had to move back home. And we've been somewhat ostracized in certain circles." I leaned back in my chair, studying the woman who had stood by silently while my father dragged me by my hair. "Again, I'm sorry for your difficulties, but I'm not sure why you're telling me this." Her eyes finally met mine directly. "Because I realize we made a terrible mistake. All of us." The acknowledgement, however, belated and possibly motivated by self-interest, was still something I never expected to hear. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "Your grandfather saw something in you that we refused to see. she said softly. And now you're building something impressive while our world falls apart. What do you want from me, Mom? I asked directly. She took a deep breath. A chance to make amends somehow. Perhaps business advice for your father, or a position for Amanda. She's struggling to find work with the family reputation damaged. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy. Not enough to immediately invite them back into my life, but enough to offer a measured response. I can't give Amanda a job, I said firmly. That wouldn't be fair to my team or to her. And I'm not qualified to advise Dad on investment banking. Her face fell slightly. But I continued I could recommend Amanda for a position with one of my clients who's expanding their marketing department. Her business background would be valuable there. As for Dad's firm, I know consultants specializing in reputation repair for financial institutions. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a small opening. My mother recognized it for what it was, nodding slowly. That would be very generous of you, considering everything. As she rose to leave, she paused, reaching into her purse. I brought this. I thought you might want it. She handed me a framed photograph of Harold and me at my high school graduation. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. At the door, she turned back. Your grandfather would be proud of what you've built here and what you've become despite our failures as parents. With that acknowledgement hanging in the air between us, she left. I sat for a long time afterward, looking at the photograph and reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. In the months and years that followed, my relationship with my family slowly evolved into something new, not the close bond I had once craved as a child, but a cautious, limited connection based on clearer boundaries and mutual respect. My father never fully admitted wrongdoing, but he stopped actively undermining me. Amanda and I established a cordial, if distant, relationship, occasionally meeting for coffee when professional paths crossed. Harold's legacy design flourished, earning recognition for innovative, sustainable projects across the Northeast. We expanded thoughtfully, maintaining our core philosophy rather than chasing growth for its own sake. I found fulfillment not just in the creative work, but in building a company culture that valued integrity and vision, qualities my grandfather had embodied. The pocket watch Harold gave me sits on my desk now, a daily reminder of the man who believed in me when no one else did. Sometimes when facing difficult decisions, I find myself asking what Harold would advise, not because he was perfect, but because he understood that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in impact and relationships. The betrayal by my family taught me painful but valuable lessons. First, standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. For years I tried to earn approval by compromising who I was, only to discover that some people will never be satisfied unless you become who they want you to be. Second, adversity reveals character, both others and your own. In my darkest moment, when I had nowhere to go, I discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, and identified allies I might never have recognized in times of comfort. Third, documentation is power. Harold's foresight in recording his intentions and gathering evidence protected his legacy and my future. In a world where truth is often contested, having proof makes all the difference. Fourth, success is the best response to betrayal. Not success defined by wealth or status, but by creating something authentic and valuable that reflects your true self. Finally, I learned that while forgiveness may be ideal, it isn't always possible or even necessary for healing. Sometimes the healthiest outcome isn't reconciliation, but redefinition, creating new boundaries that protect your peace while allowing for basic human decency. My grandfather's $10 million inheritance provided financial freedom, but the real gift was the opportunity to discover who I am beyond family expectations and definitions. The beautiful irony is that in trying to take everything from me, my family inadvertently set me free. If you've ever faced betrayal by those who should have protected, you know that it doesn't define your story. It's merely a difficult chapter. Your response is what truly matters. Have you experienced family betrayal? What helped you move forward? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Remember, sometimes the people who try to limit you are the ones most afraid of what you might become when you believe in yourself. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to build your own legacy with or without those who should have supported you from the beginning.